political cycle, the agreement on the review of the governance, yes, we are hopeful.
Janos, you had a question?
Hi, Janos Almbahaman from Euractiv. So last year you said the general escape clause would be applied for this year 2023, and member states did their budgets under the impression that it would be applied this year. And now you are saying that next year you will open excessive deficit procedures exactly on the basis of the 2023 budget and 2023 data. So how are you justifying that?
There are several points. So first, already when we activated the general escape clause, we were very clear that general escape clause is not suspending the Stability and Growth Pact and not suspending the procedures within Stability and Growth Pact. And in our fiscal guidances in consecutive years, we have flagged for a possibility of launching excessive deficit procedures, including the latest for spring of this year. So this is something which member states definitely could factor in when they were preparing draft budgetary plans for 2023. So what we are doing with this guidance, we are confirming that we are not going to launch excessive deficit procedures this year, but we are going to do so in spring next year. But possibility for launching also this year has been flagged in a previous fiscal guidances.
Anna, you had a question?
Following up on the same topic, according to your forecast, there is a majority of countries which plan to be in excess of 3% next year. And of these, a number, Belgium, Spain, Italy, France, are also going to be in excess in 2024. So would you say, according to your fiscal guidance, that you're planning excessive deficit procedures against a majority of EU countries in 2024? Thanks.
Not something we would prejudge at this stage. I think also the macroeconomic forecasts are going to be updated several times before now and spring next year. What we are just flagging and providing clarity to member states, the intention of launch the excessive deficit procedures in spring next year. So something member states can, in a sense, prepare for.
Let me only add something that I think we should all be aware of. We are in a uncertain and rapidly evolving situation. What is clear now when we speak, is that there is a strong case to make an effort to adapt our budgets to the fact that the emergency on energy prices is weaker than it was a few months ago. I think, and at the same time, we know that the challenge of interest rates, core inflation is not yet a challenge that we have won. So, of course, we will discuss the outturn in 15 months from now, but this doesn't mean that it is clear already now that we have to make this maneuver of reducing, especially measures on energy, non-targeted measures on energy, and at the same time preserve national investment and absorb European funds for investments. Not an easy task, but I think the message from the Commission is very helpful from this point of view to address this situation.
David Carrete. You have the floor.
Thank you, David Carretta, Radio Radicale, Italian Radio. I will ask my question in Italian, if you don't mind. La mia domanda si rivolge sia al vice...
It's to both, Executive Vice President and to Commissioner Gentiloni. It's true that the price of energy is lower now than it was 6 months ago. That is true. But prices might go up again because, as you said yourself, there is still great uncertainty. There is a war at our borders. There are massive investments necessary in a double transition. There is investment which is necessary, or state aid which is necessary to respond to the Inflation Reduction Act of the Biden administration. So, against that backdrop, how can you reconcile all that with a restrictive fiscal policy? It's, I think, a topical question, given the Ministers of Defense meeting. The ammunition and the production of ammunition for Ukraine, do you classify that as an investment in European security or as ongoing expenditure in defense?
Sì, direi il quadro.
I would say that the framework drawn up by David Carretta is correct. It's a picture of the state that we're in, but you do need to add two things. The first is that there is a level of inflation which remains very high, particularly with respect to core inflation. Our forecasts are down, and that remains true, but the challenge is by no means over. And with high inflation, that is, of course, a threat for purchase power. It is a threat to social justice in our countries. And the second thing is that prudence with respect to the debt must remain a factor in our economic policy making. So, of course, the challenge of growth, the challenge of international competitiveness, the IRA, etc. But I mean, I would say that the main message is that on the table now, there's been a mass of resources for investment without precedent available for investment, and those resources are available inter alia to countries who have a big challenge with debt. So I think that the guidelines that the Commission has are to focus on the need to not reduce investment. This year, there isn't a reduction of investment, and that's a good thing, unlike what happened after the financial crisis, and in absorbing common resources. That goes hand in hand with prudence in fiscal policy. In a previous life, the Minister of Economy talked about a narrow path, and the path remains narrow.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to what Commissioner said, just maybe to reiterate this point on the need of having consistent macroeconomic policy mix. Because if you'll have in current high inflation environment, fiscal policy and monetary policy working at cross purposes, we may end up in a situation where ECB is forced to tighten monetary policy even further. and also the fiscal stimulus ending, stimulating mainly inflation and less growth. So that's why there is this overall approach towards more fiscal prudence.
I will now give the floor to Jorge Riborero, who's joining us remotely. Jorge, you have the floor.
Hello, good morning. Hello, Vice President. Hello, Commissioner. I want to pick up on what David just said, you know, the high uncertainty over the economy. We don't know what's happening what's going to happen in the energy market. There are many question marks still looming over the European Union. So I want to ask you quite clearly, are you committed to launch the deficit procedures next year, no matter what happens this year, in the case that, you know, things take a turn for the worse because energy prices go up again and governments are forced to spend even more to cushion the impact of this crisis? And then once you resume these deficit procedures, we know that many countries are currently exceeding the 3%. Paola was just mentioning that. Aren't you afraid that once the rules are back on track, you're going to have some sort of avalanche of deficit procedures because there are so many member states that are currently not complying with the rules? How do you see things playing out next year? Thank you.
Maybe 2 points. So first of all, clearly we are not taking any macroeconomic policy decisions as you were formulating, no matter what. We are taking macroeconomic policy decisions based on the data available and based on the forecasts available. So that is a basis also of our fiscal policy guidance right now, where we see that all in all, economy is performing slightly better than previously expected, and that the risks to the economic outlook are broadly balanced. So this in a context in which we are taking the decisions. And since we are signaling it well on time, it's also obviously a possibility for member states to do their adjustments, and particularly in our fiscal policy guidance. We outline specifically we'll be expecting member states to provide information on phase out of the energy support measures, because that has been one of the discussions which we had with the finance ministers on several occasions on the need of better focus, better targeting of those measures, and obviously ensuring that those measures are temporary and responding to the period of crisis and not beyond that.
Well, in short, we are not taking decisions that should be taken in 15 months today. We are giving clear guidance and indication. I think this is very important and useful for member states. But to say, well, whatever happens, this decision will stay, of course, would be a little bit ambitious, no? Especially after what we lived in the previous 2 or 3 years. On energy, interesting to note a study made by DG ECFIN on the costs that the same measures that were taken would have had if these measures would have been limited to the 2 lower quintile of our society, so to the 40% more in need of our societies. In this case, the cost in 2022 would have been of 0.3% and not of 1.2%. So a huge difference. Of course, we know that it's easy to describe these things here in Berlaymont, and it is a little bit different to take decisions, especially if you have to take them in a hurry. But I think now we have an experience And if we have new challenges from the end coming from the energy prices, I think there is scope and time to make what we were not able to do 1 year ago, so to make these measures more targeted. The difference between 0.3% and 1.2% is a huge, huge difference.
Yes, the back.
Yes, thank you, Angela Mauro, HuffPost Italy. I have a political question on the excessive deficit procedures, which could be triggered next year. It'll be spring 2024, just before the European elections. I was wondering if there is any consideration on the risk that this could be fuel to Eurosceptical movements at the elections next year. Thanks.
First of all, exact timing of the European semester cycle is for 2024 is still to be confirmed. If I remember correctly, for example, in 2019, the European semester cycle was actually after European elections, not before.
Good answer.
Question on the left.
Hi, Tommaso Gallavotti, in Kronos Italy. I'm going to ask my questions in Italian to the Commissioner. As I say, that translation is provided. Commissario, due domande.
Two questions. In the past, when you were Prime Minister, if you'd been able to do a reform of the Stability Pact of the kind that you're seeing now, and the second on Eurostat, problems in Holland in assessing inflation because certain things were not counted in, and that problem may exist in other countries. There's been revisions. How did that technical question in overestimating the inflation in the Eurozone impact on your thinking now?
Sul secondo aspetto.
On the second question, I am the commissioner responsible for Eurostat, but it's a responsibility which is quite formal in nature. The first guarantee that we give the European citizen, after all, is, as at a national level, by the way, within government, is the independence of the people producing statistics. Because if the people producing statistics are dependent, other than in a formal way, on the executive, that would be a bit of a problem. So what Eurostat does and their assessments are technical. They can have consequences in policy making, of course, and in those cases, of course, we will discuss it. As to the quality of the agreements that will emerge, I think it is a well-advanced compromise, and that compromise is in the interest of the vast majority of European countries, in the sense that, seen against the backdrop of a country like Italy, where there's more gradual reduction in the debt, also issues with investment producing that effect, and it's an excellent operation, therefore. But in countries who look at the applicability of European rules and lament the fact that those rules are not always applied, there's interest there too. I don't think it's by chance that one of the most useful contributions to the discussion and to the Commission's guidelines came from a strange pair of countries, not strange, by strange I mean unusual, but it was Spain and the Netherlands. This speaks for itself in terms of the commonality of interest from different areas, and that you're not talking about a trench warfare type situation that we might have seen over the past years on fiscal issues. At least I hope not.
I see one more question on the Interactio platform. So Marco Bresolin, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marco Bresolin. Last up, a question for both of you. You said that the country-specific recommendation that you will issue maybe in May for 2024 will be consistent with the criteria proposed by the Commission, with the Commission reform, while also remaining consistent with the current legislation under the Stability and Growth Pact. Can you elaborate a bit more on how they could fit into the old legal framework, the criteria that you proposed with your orientation in November, and that will be endorsed by member states? Thank you.
Indeed. So as regards the member states' stability and convergence programs, indeed, we urge member states to prepare their stability and convergence programs in a manner which would be consistent also with their potential fiscal structural plans under the new framework. And that's what we would be assessing. Clearly, there is a bit of dilemma, as you outlined, how to take into account already elements, so to say, forward-looking elements from the emerging framework while being consistent with the framework which is still in force. One of the questions clearly here is the question of 120th rule. But there I would underline that also in previous years before disactivation of this clause, we're not applying this rule in a strict sense and rather taking the broad compliance with the preventive arm of the Stability and Growth Pact as a proxy for compliance also for 120th rule. So there were already some solutions which were possible. But indeed, this dilemma is there, and as a Commission will help to square the circle.
And we will, because I think this guidance, which of course is raising several questions, as I said in my introduction, is a fine balancing act. And I have to also I think we have to thank our legal services that were supporting this effort. It's not an easy task. I think in this guidance, we make it very clear. But of course, it is also a call for all the stakeholders and first of all for member states to work for the consensus on the new framework, because this fine balancing act cannot be repeated every few months. It's a bridge. But we can't have a never-ending bridge. So we need to build consensus.
One very last question from Andy Bounds.
Hi, Andy Bounds, the Financial Times. Commissioners, you both talked about the need for fiscal restraint, and I think Commissioner Gentiloni, you talked about cutting day-to-day spending. You've both run countries. What does this mean for European citizens? What does it mean for governments? What do they actually have to do to make this advice work? They can end the energy measures, but presumably it goes much further than that. What budgets should be cut? Thanks.
First of all, we had been going through several years of very massive fiscal stimulus and massive support measures, which were provided initially in a context of COVID, later in a context of Russia's aggression against Ukraine and high energy prices provided to both households and businesses. And so primarily indeed, and that's explicitly referred also in our fiscal guidance, we are discussing about a phase out of those support measures. And especially also least targeted measures. Commissioner Gentiloni already outlined some of the data which we are having in our fiscal guidance, showing how much better targeting on the measures can provide in terms of fiscal savings. Just to reiterate the figures which he mentioned, if we focus our support on first 2 quintils of population, the cost of the fiscal support measures would go down from 1.2% of GDP to 0.3% of GDP, which is very sizable. That's to give just one example, but clearly it's for member states to decide on both specific pathways and on prioritization of expenditure.
Yes, let me only add that, of course, it's not to us to give instructions to national governments. But what I see is the fact that I was referring to this, the necessity to both prudent fiscal policies and supporting, preserving investments. This balance is essential because what the data we see for the last period are very clear. The path of reduction of both debt and deficit was very strong. But of course, the starting point was quite high on deficit and on debt because of the universal support, pandemic, etc. So now we enter in a different period where this universal support is no more justified, high inflation, etc., etc. But of course, among the tasks of governments is the task to preserve growth. If we are not able to preserve growth and to protect public investments, it will be much more difficult to reduce deficit and debt. So the balance is needed, not only the message, so to say, we need a new austerity. We have hundreds of billions to invest and to spend at European level, and this is not austerity, this is recovery.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank the Executive Vice President, Commissioner Gentiloni, for coming down to the press room today, all the interpreters and all the participants for their questions. And this concludes today's press conference on the Commission's fiscal policy guidance for 2024.